Right. Well, and that's where, like I said, with this,
And good evening. It is 6 o'clock, and I'd like to call to order the Keizer Planning Commission. We are here at the Keizer Civic Center, and it looks like we have a full house minus our student advisor, which I think she's graduating, going and doing great things. So I think we did say thank you to her at our last meeting in May or June. Wish her the best of luck and all the wonderful things she's going to be doing in her post-high school career. Second order of business would be consideration of the May 2024 minutes. If you've taken a look at those, can I please get a motion on the table on the minutes, please?
I'll move to accept the minutes as written.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Witters and a second by Commissioner Hutches. Is there anything for discussion on the matter? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Yay. All right, appearance of interested citizens. Melissa, we got anybody signed up? I mean, it's a huge crowd. We got our two frequent flyers. Glad to see you ladies here tonight. But we do have some guests in the audience. And so Shane, I think you're going to introduce them under item 4 here, which is the climate-friendly area presentation and discussion.
That is correct.
Great.
Are we ready? All right, well, so tonight we're kind of doing it's like a work session, like planning commission meeting. I know that you love those. This is kind of important stuff. We've been talking for a while now about the climate-friendly equitable communities rules, some of the work that the city is doing with scenario planning, and then the climate-friendly areas or walkable mixed-use areas. I have been before you before talking about this process. We did a study last year that we had to submit where we studied and looked at some of our areas. So this is now kind of step 2 of that process. And tonight with us is Scott White from Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments and Kim Sapinar. They are our consultants on helping us kind of come up with analyzing the code and making changes that we'll be bringing to you at a future meeting. But tonight we wanted to kind of give you some overview, some background, and also really what we're looking for tonight from the commission is some kind of general consensus things. We're gonna have a little time, and Scott will go through this, but we're gonna have a little time to give you information and then also ask you some kind of input as we kind of go, hopefully not too much back to the drawing board, but to kind of try to get it right the first time. Not dissimilar to how we handled the House Bill 2001 amendments. However, the good news is this is a lot more finite because some of the previous work that we've done in this city is very close to what the state is imagining that we need to do now. So with that, I want to invite Kim and Scott up to the dais here, and they're gonna kind of walk us through. And thank you guys for being here.
So I just wanted to correct the record. Commissioner Burson's not here. So I didn't just want to, I said there was a full slate, but anyways, I know you got that. It's just a thing. Sorry, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Keizer Planning Commission. As Shane said, my name is Scott White, and I just want to clarify the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments. We're kind of doing this consulting thing here, but we serve Keizer. We serve local jurisdictions and not necessarily the private sector. And Keizer is a member of Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments. Just want to kind of give you an overview of things here. I'm going to just make sure this works here. This is the first slide, and this is a work session. So eventually what we have to propose would be a legislative matter before the Planning Commission for a recommendation to the City Council. Work session just provides that opportunity for us to identify key issues, considerations, that sort of thing. So you're made aware of the proposal and that we can receive feedback from you. We do have some questions at the end. You received a packet. Part of your agenda has all the materials that we've put together, and we're going to talk about that this evening. It's just kind of the way things will flow here. Little chevrons up there. We have, I'm going to provide an overview, a 1,000-foot overview of climate-friendly areas, or CFAs for short. After that, if you have some questions about what the rules say, happy to answer that. Then it's Kim's turn here. She's going to talk about Keizer-specific numbers, what was put together through the phase one analysis. We're into phase 2 now. And so she'll explain what was produced. And if you have questions about the numbers, Kim will be answering those questions. Chevron number 3 there is when we'll talk about exhibit number 1 that you have as part of your materials packet this evening. And that is what our first draft is of the amendments that we see as necessary for rule compliance, that sort of thing. So, and we'll talk about that and have some questions for you as well. Just to start the overview here, a lot of information is available on the website. The Department of Land Conservation and Development has worked to put these rules together. Kim and I are not part of the state. Just to clarify that, we are not affiliated in any way with Department of Land Conservation and Development. But we are familiar with what they have put together, especially the front page of what's shown there, the climate-friendly methods guide. It's gone through a couple of versions, I think, and Kim and I worked in it. So we have some graphics actually from that. I think we're kind of giving it credit here, but also just the link there. So a lot of the things, if we overload you with information tonight, there is a source to go to for additional information. So what is a climate-friendly area? There is a rule definition for it, and as it's somewhat long-winded, this is a breakdown of that in bullet form there. And so it is an urban mixed area containing or planned to contain a mixture of high-density housing, jobs, businesses, and services located along a transit corridor, featuring the well-designed connected pedestrian environment, do not contain large parking lots, and provided with abundant tree, canopy and tree vegetation. Sorry, I'm reading from a distance. So there's maybe a little bit more in the definition, but that's the gist of just the definition. And then we'll kind of talk about the rules for implementing it. But I just, to get that in to everybody's mind, that what is a climate-friendly area. Also on this slide here, climate-friendly areas are just a component of the climate-friendly, equitable communities. Or CFEC, I think, is kind of the acronym that's been used. If you hear CFEC, climate-friendly areas, CFAs, the graphic just shows that area. I'm not, so just kind of a wild approximation of what the scope that is climate-friendly areas. So I want to make it clear tonight, I think we did that as far as your written materials. We're not here to introduce any type of parking-related rules. That is part of CFEC, different area of rules. What we have are mostly the density and height standards that are the focus of climate-friendly areas. So just wanted to make sure we're no discussion about parking, because that's not an area that Kim and I were contracted to do through our work. As far as the thresholds for having a climate-friendly area, the state describes, as part of the rules here, that they're in the most populated areas in the state. So it must be in one of Oregon's 7 metropolitan, there's 8 of them there, so there's 8 stars. And the Portland metro area, I should say, is a MPO. Doesn't need to do all of this stuff because they have a lot of station area community planning that they have put together through many years. So in essence, they have climate-friendly areas already. But a lot of jurisdictions inside these metropolitan areas, or MPOs for short, do require the creation of these climate-friendly areas. There's another threshold too, city size includes cities and some urbanized county areas, at least one, over 5,000 in population. So here in this slide, we have the cities inside an MPO, 5,000 plus in population. And then in the box there, 13, 14, and 15, that's the Keizer, Salem Keizer MPO. And it is where Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments was contracted to prepare phase 1 analysis for CFAs. We did that for Salem, of course, for Keizer, which we're here tonight. And then the urbanized portions of Marion County within the Salem and Keizer UGB. If you're curious what that area is, it is Lancaster Drive, some pockets of which are unincorporated that Salem has not annexed. So there's just a few of them, maybe 3 or
2 big pockets.
2 big pockets. So that's what that area is. It's pretty much developed and zoned commercial. Anyways, so that was our area of focus for phase 1 review. So and this is just a nutshell of what the rules describe this in a little further detail, but this slide identifies the work, the study phase 1. And during that study phase there, we have identification of potential CFAs, and also evaluating the pros and cons of potential CFA areas on a variety of considerations. Part of your packet included a kind of a score sheet, a summary there, if you had an opportunity to see that. And so we're not going to go through all of that, I'll spare you, but that was part of the phase 1 work. And so phase 2 is what is underway right now. DLCD, I think we mentioned as part of the staff report that Department of Land Conservation Development, again, DLCD, they have acknowledged the phase 1 work. They have accepted the numbers. Kim's going to go over those numbers here. But with that, it is now a matter of going into phase 2, which means the city designates which area or areas to designate as CFAs and adopts what necessary zoning map and development code changes are determined necessary for that. We'll explain further, but no zoning map amendment is necessary for the city of Keizer. Definitely for the urbanized areas of Marion County, but Keizer is looking pretty good with respect to zoning. So I'm just going to do more of a breakdown here. I gave you the definition of a CFA. These are kind of just the rules, what they are in further detail and what the rules speak to. This is kind of the location rules for CFAs. You have the entire rules as part of your packet, but they're very difficult to digest, so I'm just kind of going to go through the highlights of them here. Urban centers, they have to be either existing or planned including downtowns and neighborhood centers, but they have to be transit served by chariots, essentially. And that transit served also has a qualifier with respect to the frequency, if I can say it, frequency of stops. Quarter hour, I think, is the, yeah. So that's kind of one qualifier for location. Readily serviceable. Now, this is all of the wet utilities, sanitary sewers, storm drainage, and water. Must be served or planned to be served by these urban services. I have kind of a star there. It's hard to read the little footnote, but basically, plan to serve. It may not be that you have lines that are of sufficient capacity or maybe be in the best structural shape, but the way that the rules read, it's a matter of plan to, that the ability of a developer to come in or the city to have capital improvements that are acknowledging what's necessary for the future. Multimodal, if I can say it, sorry, must be, here's again, planned to serve high quality bicycle and transit services. There's another buzzword, high quality. What does that mean? And again, it is planned to serve, not an evaluation of existing. Hazard areas, last item here on the slide. So that would include the Goal 7. Goal 7 basically covers floodplains, fire-prone areas. And so there are some areas of flood, 100-year flood, FEMA mapped areas in Keizer, and none of the areas that we'll identify had that. So in this particular item, not too much of concern for Keizer for non-hazard areas. So there are some size and capacity rules. So Kim's going to show some numbers with respect to Keizer on this, but the blue highlighted area, it's a kind of a range here where depending on the size of the population of the city, you have kind of a scale. I think Keizer's roughly almost 40,000 in population, so it sort of fits in that 25 to 50,000 range there. And what that means is at least one climate-friendly area of minimum size of 25 acres. And the part on the bullet that's shown there in bold letters, what that area must be is cumulatively, if I could say, a cumulative size zone, and at least 30% of the total identified number of housing units necessary to meet all current and future needs. So we'll explain that further if you need it. I think that the commission has been involved with housing needs analysis, if I can use that buzzword, and Shane is smiling over there. But that's what your future housing needs and capacity. 30% of that number is allocated to these areas. So anyways, there's some dimension things too, as far as that 75-foot circle there. It has to be kind of a diameter of at least 75 feet. And that's to kind of make sure that the CFA is not just localized along a corridor of a street. That's the size and capacity rules. Just kind of going through another slide here identifies the development regulatory rules. So these rules would apply when the Planning Commission is acting in a quasi-judicial capacity where you are reviewing an application, development application of sorts for compliance to various standards, building height and setbacks and things like that. So that's something we'll go into further detail with respect to density and building height, because we are proposing that certain changes can be made to the development code for rule compliance on those two items. No problem with the existing code with respect to allowed uses. The rules do speak to certain uses, encouraging a mix of uses for climate-friendly areas. But we evaluated we looked at the Keizer Development Code, and the uses of the city MU zone, existing mixed-use zone, are adequate. They meet what the rule calls out for what uses are supposed to be acknowledged in climate-friendly areas. Parks and trees, you would think a climate-friendly area has, there's some standards specific to maybe a minimum landscaping or minimum tree canopy or something like that. There isn't. So the rules just kind of speak generally to providing that where feasible, but there isn't any numeric numbers. So anyways, just kind of going over some of those development-related standards. Also process and citizen involvement rules. And this one, it's not so much an area that Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments was involved with so much. In community engagement, that was more so something that Shane had in part with the community, and a firm, Kearns and West, was engaged in that, a private firm for that purpose. There is some anti-displacement analysis that is included, and Kim will talk about that in further detail. So just wanted to, this is just, again, the 1,000-foot level overview of the rules, but there are some rules that speak to citizen involvement and equity analysis. That ends my overview of what climate-friendly areas are and the key components. Happy to answer questions at this point. If there are none, we'll go to Kim, and she'll speak specifically about the rules I just mentioned, how they apply to Keizer.
Commissioners, any questions or comments at this point? No? Okay, please continue.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. As we said, or introduced, I'm Kim Sapinar with the Council of Governments, and this was a great opportunity for Scott and I to work together. He's a skilled land use planner, and I'm the GIS map-making spreadsheet person. So the combined efforts that we put together, we're able to kind of do this assessment as a study. So again, that's what was required specifically from DLCD to kind of do an overview and a study. And so these are what some of the results are for us here. Very specific to Keizer. So as all this high level rules sort of trickle down to what we were looking at and what would be applicable for Keizer, we got feedback from staff, we worked with Shane, but we were looking at where might be the most reasonable areas in the city to look at to do this sort of analysis, because it was going to be looking specifically at zoning, at existing zoning and dimensions. So the location, the area, sort of size and capacity, on all of the regulatory rules. We wound up really taking input from staff to look at your existing River Cherry overlay district, making the most sense. You've done previously a great amount of work in terms of your redevelopment work. There's currently a preponderance of mixed use zoning and comprehensive plan designation in the area, which dovetails into this sort of study of looking at potential CFA. We got input. We didn't just look at the River Cherry overlay district. We did kind of put a map out, sat around, did a fair amount of discussion, what if? But a big part of that initial feedback was you could take a look at, for example, the Keizer Station area, but you would be entailing a great deal more in terms of development code changes and standards that just may not be applicable at that. So it's not that these are the only sites that you must do, but these were the most likely and seem to be the most worthy of kind of giving a full analysis to take a look at.
And one thing I would add to that, because Kim is absolutely right, one of the things that we looked at, and I think we talked about this at Planning Commission, although I don't know that all of you were commissioners at that time, but when these climate-friendly areas are kind of imagined as being more of downtown areas. And as we all know, in Keizer, we don't have a classic downtown. But the work that we've done over the last 20 years with some of the other area plans, like the revitalization plan was the most recent one, but prior to that, there was the River Road Renaissance Plan, which was way back like 20 years ago. And historically, we've looked at River Road as, while we don't maybe have a classic downtown, we have an opportunity to create maybe pockets of downtown areas, which is kind of what led us to that River Cherry Overlay District, looking at those activity centers we've already kind of identified. So just as a refresher. Thanks, Kim.
This slide is a bunch of numbers. I want to just kind of hand them to you. As Scott mentioned, it's an odd set of rules. They're very specific rules. We followed a very prescriptive method, and you're going to see a couple of terrible calculations in here that are very prescriptive just for that reason. But the target number of units for this exercise that Keizer would need to accommodate is 5,199, so almost 5,200. And the way that it's calculated is actually a little odd. It's actually all of your existing housing plus your anticipated housing need for the next 20 years, add them together and take a third. It's an interesting calculation that the LCD codified. So that was the method for determining why we have a target number of 5,199 to be potentially accommodated in a CFA. And as I continue to discuss, it really also means that this study is looking at a potential CFA to allow that amount of development at maximum. It's a ground up study, which I'll continue to describe here in just a moment, that it's taking a clean slate of what you've got and calculating what could possibly be developed at almost a maximum. And I think we've used a little bit sometimes of saying it's almost a zoning capacity analysis. Pretend there's nothing on the ground and we were going to build all the way back up. So the target number is 5,199. If we follow that method of taking your currently 3 centers that are in the River Cherry overlay and calculate them programmatically following the rules, we can generate 12,193 housing units following the rule. And if we look at just the mixed use land, that would account for almost 8,100 of those units. So it's a rough exercise. That's just the calculation. And I'm going to show you this next horrible slide to tell you that it's really an exercise in sort of mapping analysis. So I took every piece of property and calculated what the potential setback would be in average that we do, what the potential number of floors could be added and developed on that land, calculated out. It's a 30% rule that says 30% of it could be considered housing, and at a standard of 900 square feet per unit. So it truly is a formulaic experience to go through and say, therefore, on your mixed-use land or in these potential areas, you could have between 8,000 to 12,000 units, ignoring what's currently on the ground. So it's a little odd because it's a kind of a strange concept to think about, because very often we'll look at a land use study or we'll look at potential growth, or we look at partially vacant land or something that might redevelop. But this was really meant to be sort of a broad brush scope of what could be potential that could just be developed. So that gives us a couple of ballpark numbers. We took the boundaries of your current centers that are located in the River Cherry Overlay District, the Lock Haven and Jamawa and Cherry District, using those current boundaries just as a ballpark to say, let's take a look at these three areas and see what it is that we can determine. And this resulting table that's in your packet is breaking out by each of those three areas using the existing development standards, and then the last column is what if we make one change. By each of the zoning categories, the math behind that target that I just gave you. So the target number is 5199, but the potential for development is, 12,000. And if we even changed one of the parameters of the mixed use and allowed 5 floors of development instead of 4, it would yield in over 14,000 units. So this is the exercise of the mathematical equation on the last slide that yields this amount of potential housing. What this does in the standpoint of doing the CFA study is the CFA study says you need to identify an area, at least one, as a primary, and you can designate a second or a third as secondary areas that would show it would match that or allow that capacity to be built. So this table, if we look at the column under sort of our current CFA calculation, all three, of course, would accommodate more than 5199 units. But you could choose one, in this example, you could choose one of the areas, a Cherry or Chemawa or Lock Haven, and then choose a second one as a secondary, and you would meet that target of 5199. And the last column showing given that there are development standards that need to be adjusted in the code. If we switch to 5 floors, actually just the Cherry sub-district in the River Cherry Overlay District would meet that criteria of what's required for a CFA study, a CFA area for DLCD. Meaning that there's a potential of, just on the mixed use land alone, 5,232 units of a target that's 5199. So it's a very mathematical kind of balancing process of a series of numbers that you wind up seeing in a spreadsheet to kind of give us those pieces to sort of put together. What this exercise does not actually look at, again, is actually not the existing density of units per net acre. It's really, you have to it's this cookie cutter approach of taking a piece of property, building it out. I got this many floors. I'm going to take a chunk. I'm going to turn it into housing units. It's just what could be possibly available.
Kim, I think the part is now you've quantified a number, right? Which sets an expectation. And so my concern is that this expectation of 5,232 units is set for the Cherry specific node of the RCOD. Mm-hmm. What that does then is it codifies in somebody's brain as they're looking through some study 5 years from now, as we're potentially looking at growth in Keizer, and they say, well, sorry, you did 7 units. And then that puts risk on the city's ability to then be compliant with a rule, which potentially has a lot of, like, the idea of plunking down 5,232 units anywhere over in that is insane. Like, the level of insanity that exists there, I don't think there's anybody in this room that wants to live in a 900 square foot house. So like, this is operating in La La Land. It's cool on Sim City, but when we're talking about real humans, this really frustrates me. I know that this is not you. You're not making this decision. You're bringing this forward, and I appreciate you doing this. But like, somebody has to understand the real impact, and the lawmakers or whoever the people that are deciding this is. I'm soapboxing a little bit. This frustrates me a lot. Yeah. Because in no universe whatsoever can I actually imagine 5,232 units going into the Cherry portion of the RCOD. Right. Like, I just don't. Like, even if you wiped it out, like, you're talking like these massive concrete towers of people, right? I mean, that's essentially what you end up with.
Yeah.
Sounds like really great living quality. I'm sure people would absolutely appreciate that. Sorry, I'm not trying to be flippant. This is just, this is insane.
I understand. And I think that there certainly is a bit of a challenge in the way that some of this has been articulated in this prescriptive path for CFAs, because it codified all of that, right, all of those pieces and the components to it, to kind of say, follow this this through and it will yield this result. And then that can be a basis of how you can go ahead and decide areas or boundaries. Well, there's more to come.
Sure, no, I'm following
Answer
along.
some of that too.
Yeah, and,
Quick
well,
question,
Oh,
probably
please.
not related, but what makes that cluster of units climate friendly exactly?
Well, it's because it's gonna be all made out of concrete, not wood.
I hear you. I think that part of what the goal is talking about in terms of greater density, of which you've got a combination of both housing and employment, with a goal of people being able to be in a more walkable mixed-use area, so that they are not getting in their car to commute to go to work. They're able to work in the environment they're in. They're able to walk to the grocery store. They're able to bike to the grocery store. So it's a concept of greater density allows for that sort of less dependent on an automobile if you're in that environment.
But if you assume an occupancy of 1.5, you're still talking at over 7,500 jobs necessary to satisfy this. So where are the jobs, right? I mean, so are we talking 7,500? Let's play the third number. Are we then talking maybe, I don't like doing math. What's a third of 7,500? 25. So we have 25 businesses now and 5,200 units of housing. Sounds like a great idea. I've seen The Fifth Element. It works. Sorry. This is not you. You guys, I appreciate what you're doing here.
That's why we started off where we are not.
No,
Land Conservation.
I'm aware.
Here
This
to,
is not,
we're
I'm
the
not
messengers.
picking on you all in the fact that you happen to be the messenger on some insanity.
We will get to, that number is daunting, and I like how Kim expressed how, hey, there's a wild assumption that you're working with a blank slate. We don't work that way. So it's just a number that needs to be generated because the rules say it.
But Scott, I think my issue still remains. This is a number that exists, which sets an expectation. And I think that that's an untenable expectation and especially if, as you mentioned in your earlier slides as part of phase one, when you're talking about the displacement of individuals, we've already seen that specifically in the Cherry area. Okay, because we've had a bunch of apartments plunked down in there and people have lived there for decades, whether they're renters or homeowners. For the most part, they're in the lower socioeconomic area in some of those cases. And so now you have apartments that frankly, they probably could have never afforded to begin with, right? And so
Now, we can come back to this too. I mean, I think that maybe.
No, yeah.
Continue, yeah, because we do have
Please,
some more
I'm sorry,
slides and it will come into questions of, but yeah, I think maybe get beyond this early math exercise.
Beyond the scary spreadsheet.
Yeah. Another scary.
Another scary slide.
Yay, more.
One of the, within a primary CFA, within a CFA, so Scott touched on this earlier, that there'll be certain requirements for a minimum density of units per net acre, and also height limits, height allowance, not a minimum development, but an allowed height. So those
It's a
are,
minimum maximum.
Yeah,
Yeah,
correct.
So 60 feet is the minimum maximum.
Correct, you can't set it any lower.
Right, okay.
Max,
Can't
it's
set-
not a minimum height.
Yeah.
It's a maximum density, which the code already has.
Right.
So with the primary, it will have to go
Yeah.
from 50
To 60.
to 60.
and this slide is if it's a building that is developed that is a mixed-use building, meaning, retail and housing units, the density doesn't apply. The density of units does not apply as a minimum. However, an FAR trigger does. So,
Yeah.
and this is a slide just showing just generally, a floor to area ratio. So it needs to be a minimum of a 2.0 floor to area ratio if it's a building that is not 100% residential.
A mixture of business maybe on the ground floor and then residential above it. That would kick in this FAR, floor area ratio.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to say anything more about the FAR before we?
Do I want to?
I don't know if you do. Do you want us to? Floor area ratio is not in the Keizer Development Code. Do we need to do thing, or is something that you have some idea about? I mean, there's a little graphic there just before we move on to the slide. Floor area ratio of 1 is equal to 1 square foot of building area for every 1 square foot of land area. And what that is showing is 2. Well, that would be 2 square feet of building area for every 1 square foot of land area. And this kind of showing, what the graphic shows is you can manipulate that. It's just a mass, it's a bulk standard. That is its floor area. It's really, but it's been introduced in a lot of cities up north, up in Beaverton and Hillsborough and Portland. And so you see a lot of cities that have sort of a minimum floor area just to get that bulk. But it only, again, kicks in if it is a mixed-use development proposal.
Quick question, does the FAR calculation, does that include both the commercial and the residential, or just the residential?
It does
portion?
both, yeah, because it's a floor area, yeah.
Combined with building. Okay. As part of this, I'm going to preface before I change the slide, as part of the study requirement included an analysis of equity and anti-displacement analysis. And this is a map that was produced showing general zones. They're actually by census tract. And it's a set of data that was created by Portland State University took 5 different factors, looked at income levels, looked at vulnerable populations, minority populations, looked at turnover, looked at potentially vulnerable housing, meaning housing that is older than 1970. And then let's see, there's a couple of other factors that they pulled census data together to kind of tag and then quantify different levels of potential anti-displacement by census tract. So the green area, just as you had said, Commissioner, is highlighted as green because it's currently an affordable neighborhood and affordable and potentially vulnerable for people who are living there to be displaced in the light of gentrification. So if you rebuild and if new apartment complex comes in, that it's at a higher income level or socioeconomic income level for people to rent, it's possible that there would be displacement of the population that is there. In the north, the purple, these were done at a fairly large level, and this data was actually provided to us from Portland State University. And census tracts, I really should have a map that zooms out a little bit because the area in green extends quite a bit. It's a very large census tract that goes all the way from a piece of Keizer out actually into a bit of North Salem. And then the area that's in purple is highlighted as already developed, advanced, exclusive. I mean, these are their terms that are being used, but essentially that newer development has taken place in the area. So part of the study was requiring us to take a look, to map it at this level as an idea that here's a potential about a concern if you're going to indicate a climate-friendly area, and if it's prone for development or redevelopment, would you have vulnerable populations that might be displaced? And part of the picture would be that some of that mitigation would be accounted for, could be taken place in part of the housing production strategies that would be adopted and looked at by the city. And so the study standpoint was an awareness factor. So this is mapping and an awareness factor of where a potential area might be vulnerable. Here's a snippet of code out of your current code. In your mixed-use zone, the minimum density of units per acre is 12. So this is the key factor that would need to change if the mixed-use zone in general, no matter which of the potentially 3 areas or centers that you're looking at, is designated the primary CFA, it would need to be raised to 20. The maximum density does not change. I think that's that's the key off of that one. We do want to just mention that this study that we did looked at not just the mixed-use zoning, but each of the areas. So there's RM, and there's a little, I'm trying to remember, there's a little bit of some.
Commercial, I think.
Commercial, a little bit of commercial, there's another zone. So we looked at all of the zoning that fell within each of these potential centers. This is just Keizer, again, specific to Keizer, that if property that is currently zoned RM were included in a CFA, there would have to be a number of changes made to the existing development standards. The currently mixed use is basically two and add FAR.
Yeah, a little-
So there would need to be more changes made to RM if RM needs to be included as part of a CFA, and the primary CFA. So, the detail of this is actually in your packet in the very extensive worksheet in the analysis of what the development code is that Scott put together for us. So we wanted to just go ahead and zoom in and kind of take a quick look at each of these three areas. It's currently highlighted on the map with the zoning showing it's pink in mixed use, and then the RM is in the sort of light orange, and then a little bit of commercial. So in the Lock Haven potentially area, it would make up, if based back on the spreadsheet, the amount of calculation, this would accommodate almost half of the target number of units that would be, if we're matching the spreadsheet and we need to find potential for development, Lock Haven alone would represent about half of the target of 5,199 units. It meets all the criteria. It's served by transit, by high frequency transit. It meets the size condition. And currently, of course, as you know, there are a number of still in Lock Haven larger undeveloped properties, rather than it being fully developed. And so larger tracts of land that you have as mixed use, and not smallly parcelized as yet. That's kind of, we're kind of look at each other to kind of say advantages and disadvantages. I did in the calculations reduce some of the development on the property that's to the west of River, because I know that it's adjacent to the creek and that it's a flooding zone. So I did not calculate maximum density there, because it seems likely that would be, reduced due to the environmental concerns.
Yeah, and I would add, when we looked at the different areas and what has already been established back in 2019 when we created these centers, the vision for, and again, the one thing I would say is that it's always very hard when we're looking at long-range planning and what could be versus what actually is that we know and what is then likely to happen. But when we looked at these areas, this was one of the primary areas that we looked at that had the potential to redevelop, because there's not only the two mixed-use pieces, but there's also a large RM piece that's within that area. And our transportation system plan calls for a new road to connect through there that will provide new bicycle and pedestrian and vehicular facilities to serve it. So I do think there's a lot of strengths with this area in designating it as a center. But Kim is absolutely right. There is some floodplain, there's some wetland areas that will have to be identified, studied, mitigated, and or not touched, which does encumber a portion of the property, which makes the development area a little bit smaller to utilize, which, as Kim said, those have been taken into the calculations. I think one of the things that we kind of want to get some consensus from Planning Commission, I guess I'm jumping a little bit ahead, is as we walk through these three areas, there are different approaches that can be taken, and we have options based on the very prescriptive methodology that the state created for us to follow. And I share your concern on the units and the quote-unquote expectation that may establish. However, I'm not aware of anything that's been codified up to this point that actually does that. And so I do have a little bit of a different take on it as the guy who approves all the building permits in town, in that what we've seen constructed in the last few years with the apartments that have been built, I think those generally would, I don't know of any of them that were built at a less than 20 unit density. It's been more the struggle of keeping them under the 28 unit max density that folks want to build for housing. So the built environment, I don't know that these changes actually affect a ton of felt changes versus what we already have allowed for. But that's just an aside. But yeah, I think that the Lock Haven Center, it does make a lot of sense based on the fact that we know it's going to redevelop. We have a master planning requirement on this area in the center that we're not proposing that would change, which creates a process for any applicant to go through. And it is looking at seeing redevelopment all along our River Road corridor to provide more of these mixed-use type of projects as an option for property owners, not a mandate for them. But it is hard, because I agree with you that when you see the numbers and you do the calculations and it's this very prescriptive method, it maybe feels a little bit like a mandate. But yeah, I just add that for Lock Haven.
Yeah, Commissioner.
48% of the 30% is like 14% roughly of the total requirements.
This,
Lock Haven meets.
48%, yes.
14% roughly of the 30.
It would be
Half of it.
close to half, yes,
Yeah, I
exactly.
got it.
Right. The Chamawa area, the size is correct. I mean, when we went back through, so the size is required, it meets that. It's, again, served by high-frequency transit. Looking at the, it's a large amount of mixed use that's already zoned within the area, and would meet approximately 40%, so 41% of the total,
So that
of
puts
the
us at
required units.
89% total, right? If the two were considered Lock Haven and Shema, that put us at 89% of the total 30, right?
I have to go back to my spreadsheet. Let's
roughly,
see.
yes.
Yes, roughly, yes.
But if you designated Lock Haven and Shemau, I think that
You'd-
puts
you'd
us
be
over
good.
the 51.99.
You could go with-
Any two
Any
would put
two.
you over,
This
Got
is-
it.
and with the
So the
change.
41% is 30, that's the question you asked.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
I understand.
But
exactly, right.
again, the two of them combined
Two.
still doesn't meet the requirement.
It
Yes,
does.
it does.
No, it
would.
Any two,
Yeah,
any two of your three zones.
and the one that will be next year, we can go to the, so, go ahead, Jerry.
Yes, so, and ta-da, cherry, number 3. So, this one actually, because of the size a little bit bigger, it meets almost all of the need, almost all of the
itself.
target on its own. And this is where if it is the possibility to designate Cherry as the primary alone with not a second or a third area designated with the change in height that needs to be made. And to five floors rather than 4 floors, or 60 feet rather than 50 feet. So it's got that's a great advantage if you wanted to take the tactic of, less is more, if you'd like to designate a single area only and a single CFA as one district, as a primary district. This would meet the need, and you would not need to address the second or a third. That we'll continue to ask you, it's your policy decision to kind of go forward, what you like, what you don't like, what you think is implementable or not. And of course, probably the largest drawback to this area is that there is potentially a vulnerable population that would need to be kept in mind in terms of if there's a great deal of gentrification that goes on, that there's a potential for displacement.
Yeah, that's the part I can't equivocate, is saying, this works, forget about the people. I
Right.
can't equivocate, I can't
We
get there.
might just add to that, this is what Kim said, that was a census tract area, so it's a larger area than just localized here. And we did, although this is not part of the analysis, we did
Oh, yes.
check what resources are out there. We checked the Salem Housing Authority has a number of places that they have accepting Section 8 housing voucher. The federal government issuing out a portion of Section 8 is rent that provides for low-income people. And they have a good listing of where those are located. None are here. And so that, as far as that displacement, not in this location, as far as a programmatic type of thing that's existing. Now, there might be senior housing, might be a market rate type of senior housing there. It might be that, wait a minute, my mom lives there too. So I mean, I don't want to go too much on this topic, but we did take a look at what is a known figure as far as existing affordable projects, none in this particular area.
And actually none in any of your potential CFAs. So I did have a short list of them and looked at them geographically to see, so none in any of these particular boundaries.
And I think the one thing I would add is that, and I think what Chair Lawyer is alluding to, which is very common in Keizer, is we have areas of kind of naturally occurring, I won't call it affordable housing, but more affordable housing maybe. And this definitely is touching in the area of town where we have a higher percentage of low mod income and a more affordable housing product generally than in other parts of town. And I think that's one of those pieces. The flip side of it, which I think is interesting. So currently, we allow 50-foot building heights and 28 units an acre, up to redevelopment. It's been allowed for a long time. Yeah. And we don't actually do anything to address gentrification or displacement currently. The changes that we're making, the question is are these changes that we're making actually changing what we already allow for? Which is really what we have to quantify and study a little bit at the state level. That's a different question than from a policy perspective as a city of Keizer. What do we want to do to help with housing in general and protections for maybe a more vulnerable population base? But I want us to be careful just in your role as the Planning Commission, that may be very well something that we want to weigh in on. But I don't think that this project in and of itself has a huge impact, frankly, to what we've either been doing or not been doing for the last 40 years in existence. However, because these rules came out of the climate friendly and equitable communities, and there was a very, very strong element of looking at land use planning through a more equitable lens, because historically that has not always been looked at. And so it was, I think the state reacting to that move of saying, hey, when we're doing things now, we need to be looking at these things through this equity lens to consider how this might impact others versus, hey, there's properties that are a little bit more affordable for condemnation, so we're gonna put our transportation system right through the middle of there. Right. And so there are some advantages that we have in Keizer versus some of the other communities going through this, well, I was gonna say a word that wouldn't, going through this process, we'll just call it a process, that's it. I won't make any aside comments that I almost slipped up with. But the reality for us is that, our infrastructure and our established patterns of transportation are pretty well established. So we're really talking about the likelihood of redevelopment and how these changes that we have to consider in order to be compliant with state statutes it's hard, we don't have a crystal ball, but how likely are they to make a large impact? And, we had a market rate study. It was a market rate light study done when we did our revitalization plan. And it basically told us that the likelihood of things just full-blown redeveloping all at once, it's not happening unless the city did massive incentives to make it happen, which I do go through the budget process, and that's not
happening anytime real soon. But I do think there is that element, because honestly, when we looked at that, just for full disclosure, when we looked at these areas, this Cherry Center was the one on my list that was like, maybe we just ignore it, because I don't know what we do for displacement and equity concerns. The flip side is that I'm not sure that based on what is already established, the change we're making is not actually making a greater impact. A 60-foot building versus a 50-foot building is 10 feet. And like I'm telling you from the street, you're not gonna be able to tell the difference unless they're sitting right next to each other, right? If the maximum density doesn't change, and it's still a 28-foot maximum density, which we could do, there are a lot of jurisdictions that are saying, you know what? Let the market drive the development, let the property owners develop their properties. We don't have a maximum. Let them build what they think they want to build. And, we already know, we've been through this, and I know Scott said we're not gonna talk about parking, but the reality is that we know unless something magically changes in the rules, which it isn't going to happen. We tried, we went down that road, and that's not happening. We're not gonna have parking minimum requirements in the next couple of years. Again, the state says, and my experience with developers says, people are not gonna build things without any parking because they won't be able to rent those things or lease those properties. So it is hard, because I feel like it's a little bit of a, I won't say a chicken and egg kind of thing, but maybe it's a little bit that game where you hide the shell under the cups and you move them around and say, oh, don't look at this one. Because the reality is, I think the balancing act is, okay, we have to do certain things to comply, and we do have some options on how we want to comply. I think the other question that I really want Planning Commission to be considerate of is, what is the balancing point of what makes more sense for Keizer as a whole, and the properties along River Road and those owners and the folks that are looking to utilize their land, because we know we need some more housing. So, okay, allow people to build some more housing. We've already established that for the last 20 years. So there is an element of, is there a value in providing consistency amongst these districts, where we've adopted a set of standards that we said, hey, here's a node in the southern part of town around Cherry and River, here's a node around Shamawa, and here's a node around Lock Haven, where we anticipate there could be an increased level of density in these 3 specific sub-districts. And now the state comes and says, well, you gotta do just a little bit more. So there is that question from my end of, I don't know how the Planning Commission feels, and there's not a right or wrong answer. It's ultimately a recommendation that you're gonna make to our council, but there's a couple paths forward. Bare minimum, Cherry Avenue could be done all by itself, and it could check the box, and we could just, okay, it's done. And we're gonna have to do something with the equity analysis piece, and I'm not exactly sure what that looks like. The other option is we could say, okay, Lock Haven and Shamawa, and we'll designate one the primary and the other a secondary, which drops that density standard from 20 minimum to 15, right? So there's also that kind of tiered approach we could take, or we could designate all 3 and have part of them be the 15 feet or 15 units an acre, and only one of them be the 20 units an acre. So there are some options for us. And it's a very hard thing, because, I mean, the reality is we could change all the words in the code, and I'm not sure how much it's gonna change what gets built on the ground, unless a property owner wants to change what is there now. With the exception of Lock Haven, because there is some big vacant tracts, and we know that there's interest in seeing that developed.
I think that's helpful to sort of recenter it. I suppose the underlying concern specifically for me is, like, is this a carrot or is this a stick, right? Because what is the enforceable piece from the state's perspective in terms of, like, oh, well, you did these things, nothing's happening, now we're going to compel, right? And I think we've just been through a lot of change in the last. I mean, Councilor Duran, we went through all this with the RCOD. I mean, Commissioner Grants, you've been with me doing all the, I mean, we've all done this. It's just a lot. And you're right. I mean, we had the
Yeah.
RCD in 2019. We've had, what, 3 developments out of it, actually?
Maybe 4.
Yeah, so I mean, it hasn't driven the demand, but I think it's just one of those things like, it seems like every time we get turned around, oh,
Yeah.
hey, happy Thursday, here's a new mandate.
No, and yeah, no, I agree 100%. I'm living that every day of my life. Yeah, I didn't know I signed up for this. And I will say this, just, I don't know if this helps, but like I empathize, I hear your concerns, I have them myself. I also have lived here forever, and I'm the guy that takes the phone calls from all of our neighbors that says, why are you building more apartments, Shane? And I say, well, actually, I'm not building them. I mean, shoot, if I had that kind of money, I wouldn't be working for the government. But going into the rulemaking process that started a couple years ago and seeing all of the really confusing standards coming out and not sure exactly how to navigating them, not how to navigate them and what it would mean for us, I will tell you this, from a personal and professional perspective, I was relieved that when Scott and Kim got on board and helped us do this study last year, that we are pretty darn close
Yeah.
to already being where we should be. And we did it as a community with nothing driven by mandates.
No.
We did it as a desire to see River Road be revitalized into a vibrant area where people could walk and they could bike because they wanted to. They could be entertained, they could get services, and hopefully have some jobs that were there. And that's what we planned back in 2018, adopted in 2019 with that revitalization plan. So honestly, I was super encouraged when we went through this process of this prescriptive study that the state did kind of say, no, thou shalt, and all you metro areas, thou shalt, because you haven't been doing enough. I was pretty pleased that we could go, hey, look at what we did. Look at our show and tell. We're pretty darn close. We're talking about just a couple little tweaks. One is a 10-foot height increase that we have to allow for, and one is a minimum density that we have to increase that prior to the RCOD, we didn't have a minimum density. We just regulated maxes. And consistently, I've had to have conversations with developers when I've reviewed things saying, you're over the maximum density. You need to get rid of a few units because they want to fit more. So like, to me, that I was encouraged. So that's just another perspective that I want to share with y'all, because I know it is daunting, and you sit on a dais as volunteers and we make these changes, and I'm sure you hear about it like I do in the grocery store. Wow, why are you guys doing this? So anyway.
Let me go, Commissioner Evisham, real quick, and then back to you guys. I know you got a few more slides.
So, I mean, regardless of all this discussion, we have to pick one of these options to meet the mandate, right? Is that correct? So regardless of what we think and how we feel, that needs to be. And one option is do Cherry and be done with. Mm-hmm. The other is do the other two and be done with, right? But to me, it looks like there could be quite a bit more pros and cons than just what's there in
Certainly.
order to be able to make that selection.
Yes. And I mean, I think that that's where, as we present this information, this is really for you as the commission to consider. There isn't, you don't need an answer tonight. We're carrying the data for you and giving you the pictures, but it is. And now that we've just spent this, I feel bad, the next slide.
Yeah, I was looking at it, kind of, let's complicate things even more.
All right, so the one more complication I'm going to throw for you is that we follow, the state actually allows you two methods, a prescriptive method and an outcome-oriented method. And when we began this process and began the study, the outcome-oriented method, honestly, was very nebulous, with very little definition, and fairly onerous, because it was, you need to have housing and jobs at a density and a man, you've got it. And so in evaluation with staff, in fact, I don't think that a single jurisdiction in the state
There's not one that has
that
taken
chose the outcome-oriented
Yeah.
approach at the time that the rules were passed. Everybody did the prescriptive path. All the other cities, the 15 on the list. Now, however, when the study was submitted to DLCD, because it needed to be submitted last year and was accepted, we want to bring it to your attention because DLCD did acknowledge we've accepted the plan, we understand the study, but also consider that you have the option of taking the outcome-oriented approach. And so my next slide is the outcome-oriented approach is the yellow column here, which has its requirement is at least 90,000 square feet of construction per net acre. So it's back to the floor area ratio requirement, but only. So you wouldn't necessarily, I keep getting them, no minimum units.
The standard, yeah, correct. And by the way, this outcome-oriented standard here summarized in one little column, it modified after, yeah, so it had a combination of minimum employment and minimum density as far as dwelling units. It was just modified by some additional rulemaking to CFAs a month ago or so. So what you have is the new updated data right there in a very summary form, again, because this is kind of a sliding scale based on the population there. The rows, what the city of Keizer would fit under the 25 to 50,000. And so that is a minimum there. That's just kind of, there's a comparative here. I know this slide is kind of busy, but it does show the prescriptive standards in a nutshell comparatively to outcome-oriented standards. And that is a minimum that a project would have to produce of 90,000 square feet. We're not recommending, as far as we're taking kind of a proactive say, and we're going to show you why.
I'm going to show you why.
Yeah.
Here's why. So we took a look at two recent projects that you've had because DLCD's letter said, just submit us a couple of examples of where it's meeting this criteria. And so I pulled up a couple of examples just for evaluation. So this is on Cherry, the Cherry Avenue apartment. So 40 units went in. The lot size is about 1.6 acres. So that's 40 units. So here's an example where the units per net acre is 25. 25 units per net acre meets great density requirement. But in this building square footage is I have it highlighted here, is, basically 24,000 square feet per net acre. So it would need to be 90,000. So here's an example of something that's recently been built. You'd have to imagine that would need to be at least another story and less uncovered surface, like more buildings coverage on the lot itself to meet that requirement. And similarly, I pulled this one up. This is on River Road Apartments. I did the street picture from Google, which was when it was still under construction. I know it's done now. So I calculated what the square footage is of what's the building, actually the building's being built, right? Again, here's an example where this is 27.5 units per net acre. A high density per your net acre for units. That's admirable, but it's only yielding close to 30,000 square feet per net acre. So it's falling way short of 90,000.
So they have to be double the height.
They have to be double the height. Well, or less.
Almost triple.
Less impervious surface. Got to cut, it's basically
more buildings.
more building.
And so the reality is because we talked about this, Scott and Kim and I talked about this, and I said, I think we need to look at some of the recent stuff that we've had happen. Because, I'm, Scott and Kim aren't the only ones recommending that we go with the prescriptive approach versus the outcome-oriented approach after I looked at a few projects. Because in the prescriptive approach, those two projects would comply. They already comply. They meet the density standard. They do everything that they would need to comply. Now, if a developer chose to build them a little bit taller, a steeper shedded roof, whatever, they could have done that. But really, they would comply with the spirit of the prescriptive rules. But with the outcome-oriented rules, we're a third off. So you need a third more building, one way or the other. And probably the only way you do it is you eliminate even more parking. Now, the River Road project, I'll tell you, that's one of the ones that when the developer came in and said, I want to build these apartments, I had to make them reduce the units to get them under 28 units an acre. They had planned for a few more units that put them over it.
And they said, well, what about a variance? And I was like, hey man, you can apply for anything you want, but this guy, I don't want to get into that. So that's one where is an example of, I mean, that may be a future consideration that Planning Commission wants to consider is that maximum 28 units per acre enough? Do we care about the maximum? But in their case, they wanted a certain area for parking for their tenants, and they wanted to maximize the site to the best that they could for that multifamily housing project. And so for me, I was like, well, okay, we have a couple of built, well, almost built, not quite finished in the River Road place, but we have examples where the current standards allowed for development consistent with the proposed standards that we have to change. But if we adopted that outcome-oriented approach, it would be creating a lot larger, in my opinion, a lot larger impact for the feedback I get from neighbors. So that's why we're not, just want to be clear, that's why we're not recommending it. But the flip side is I never want to sell things to planning commission or city councilors that said, oh, we have to do this if it's not what we have to do. And so this is one of those option points. And from the head nods, I think you guys are on board with the approach we think we should take, but I don't want to assume.
Is anybody super excited about the outcome-oriented approach?
Oh, sure, I'd love to see 100 units per square, per acre.
And you got about half acre, right? So we can start to,
If you, outside of the floodway, I probably have about a third of an acre, yeah.
I'm taking that as a flippant comment, Commissioner. Yeah, I mean, the prescriptive makes sense. I think 90,000 square feet. I mean, sure, if it's a shop, but Commissioner Burchen's not here to argue that one.
Well, so basically, this slide is basically what Shane just said.
Yeah.
This is just some of your, it's just
No,
some
no, I
of
think-
your options. Certainly, the outcome-oriented approach is a pathway that you can choose. You can choose a single zone, you can choose Cherry, you can choose two others.
Yeah.
And make one a primary.
We did
one a
want to
secondary.
present it, just so it's asked and answered.
No, and actually, the
make it-
visual is super helpful. I'm a kinesthetic learner, so that was super helpful to see that because
yeah.
we've actually seen it and
Exactly.
recognizing that's only a third of the potential requirement of the prescription.
Yeah, there would be a minimum and likely a new construction method. I'll mention that when it was introduced to us through kind of a webinar that said, well, hey, we've modified the outcome-oriented option, and it reads this way, and oh, here's some pictures. Just as Kim did for Keizer, the pictures were of downtown Corvallis, and they were all over 3 stories. So that means a different construction method. When you go through over 3 stories, it's a matter of, elevator and other things. So it doesn't allow, it's flexibility. That's, I guess, the key thing, that it doesn't allow as much flexibility as the prescriptive option.
Quick question.
Yeah,
Out
Commissioner.
of curiosity, where do I find a 90,000 square foot for visual?
It's Amazon right there.
I mean,
There are some in Salem.
local?
Downtown Salem has some buildings, and then Corvallis has, but generally, yeah, you're going 4 to 5 stories in height.
That's those new, is that the remodel constructions they're doing downtown? Right there on whatever it is, the
old mall.
old mall.
I think some of the
That
recent one.
That one's
You got-
Riverwood. the
Yeah.
Yeah,
Apartments. Yeah, because it's built to the edge of the property line.
Right.
There's no parking, and that's 5 floors.
5?
So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
would be, certainly.
No more food court.
The former Nordstrom's.
Yeah, it's,
So-
okay. So we're on
Yeah,
to,
we're almost done here.
No.
Yeah, we're at the last of the, so what the idea here is just to go through Exhibit 1 of your packet that we have. We've taken the initiative here to go through the code. We don't see great changes here, and so this is just the first change that we see. We tried to, in our approach, is to utilize what you have and to try to make it simple as possible. So really, this is from the River Cherry Overlay District, and Shane will correct me if I got a nod there, that there was the right area here as far as that part of the zoning code that has specific development standards for the overlay district. And MU there, again, just localizing it to the MU zone. It's really, we're not touching as far as the maximum that can already be developed in the existing code. And I think that's kind of the general understanding, is that CFAs, and introducing the CFA components here, we're just shrinking the window of what can be built for density. If this is the minimum and this is the maximum, we're doing this. That's where the maximum density there doesn't change as shown. However, there are some blanks that are shown there on the footnotes, and so it's up to the commission to kind of make the recommendation forwarding to the council if they're okay with how this is structured. Really just would need one in there if it is cherry, but if it is two, it gets a little bit more complicated, but not much. You just kind of fill in one of the three centers that we've been talking about. And so that's number one. I can come back to this slide if you like. The other one is height. And so this is really, the primary CFA would have to go to 60 feet. So whichever center is recommended as the primary would need, again, that is not a minimum height. That is the height maximum. And then, all right, so we didn't talk too much about this, but there is a block length standard. This typically applies more so when you look at a subdivision application. It's sort of the idea of breaking up the linearness of a building, so you have kind of corridors for pedestrian activity. You already have a code standard for it, but it's at 500 feet. And so if it's a CFA, it would have to go down to 350 feet. So we've just sort of made this sort of exception for the designated CFA. So that's this particular section of code that's, I think, in the subdivision section there, Shane, if he's nodding there too. And then finally, this is a comprehensive plan policy change. So in the same webinar that I just mentioned, that they introduced the outcome-oriented option there, the person from DLCD that's been instrumental in putting together all of this stuff and working with LCDC said, oh, by the way, I want to make sure that you also have an amendment to your comprehensive plan that acknowledges CFAs. So with that, we kind of thought, okay, well, we should have something. And so we did a quick look at the Keizer comprehensive plan. There isn't anything that's contradictory as far as existing policies. I mean, lots of policies that speak to mixed use in the River Cherry Overlay District. And here's an existing policy. We are recommending some additional language there that's shown in the yellow bold, and then you'd fill in the blank again, what that sub-district is. But that's specifically acknowledging the sub-district as not just a mixed-use zone, but connected to the rules, Oregon administrative rules specifically. So that is, I don't think we have anything else. Oh, we have our questions here for you that are at the end of Exhibit 1. And so it is a matter of which three do you recommend, as we've been talking about.
Scott, can I ask a question? Or maybe it's better for Joe. What is the authority in administrative rule to compel the comprehensive plan change?
Good question. Is there something in there that has it? There is there's lots of shalls in there as
So
far as
specific to having to change.
to change the comprehensive plan. So is this a matter of designation? I don't know if there's an actual rule that says and shall, because most of the rules speak to development regulations. So we could go back and check and see if there is something in there with the comprehensive plan designation. I will mention, the city attorney will have a better answer than I do, but when we do initiate officially the legislative process, we'll have to do the 35-day notice that goes to Department of Land Conservation and Development. It is one of the things that the department, the liaison there said that I'll be looking for comprehensive plan amendment. So I don't know if it's actually in rule or not, but we are being responsive to what DLCD had to say on that.
Okay. I just, go ahead, Mr. Lindsay.
I guess the only way I can have a better answer is to say I'll also have to look it up, but sooner. You know, maybe that's a enhancement to what you said. I will look into that, although frankly, I mean, this does envision that we are supposed to be amending our comprehensive plan in order to account for these things. Whether or not that authority is there, the rules themselves, I think, kind of presuppose it. And this was part of some of the issue.
Well, I guess when I
were
hear
even-
a staff person says we want this,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I just want to make sure that, I just want to make sure we're following the rules.
We can definitely,
Yeah.
we'll definitely check on that, Chair Lawyer. I believe that even, well, generally in land use planning, when you're designating area plans, that
part of the
is
district,
kind of it is a little bit of a term of art that goes along with comprehensive plans.
Yep.
Because your zoning map is not a plan, it's a zoning map.
Yep.
You know, your development code is the regulatory structure that implements your plan, quote unquote. And so I think that's always been an assumption that we would have to do that. I believe it is in there, but we will find out for sure exactly what that language is around that and try to have a better answer for you. That's a great question though. Because that's actually one of the pieces that I asked questions to the state early on was, well, if I already comply with it and I can demonstrate my code complies with it, what's the point of me designating something at all?
Right.
It doesn't mean anything, it's words. And they kind of threw that back at me and said, well, yeah, if you already comply with it, then what does it matter if you designate it? You're already doing it. So it was kind of like, oh yeah, okay.
Lovely. Commissioner Grants, Commissioner Rocha.
You have a question back on the block length standard. So
I can go back.
if we designated a primary and a secondary, would both of those have to meet the stringent block length standards?
Correct. I haven't, this is one of those areas that I think we caught that one too, type of thing. But with the two blanks there, the intent would be for both, for the primary and the secondary, or again, as we've been talking about it, if it's just Cherry, then it would just be the one shown there.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, but that leads to a question to us. Where do we want maximum block lengths of 600 feet along River Road? Never's a long time, Counselor.
Commissioner Havisham.
So again, the last slide you had on, there's two options again, Cherry or the other two, correct?
Right there, yeah.
Again, seems to me like there's got to be more data to help decide that than just presented, correct? Other pros and cons for those two options. They have, implementability or, just a little bit more in-depth look at what the pros and cons of those two options are, right? I think that probably required for a selection.
Yeah, if I might, I think that, I understand what you're saying, and I think it's a good question. I think the challenge for staff, and especially for Kim and Scott, who were literally employed in order to do the analysis of code auditing and how do we comply with the rules. They're not policy setters.
Yeah.
You all are. So depending on what information, pros and cons are very subjective. You know, so if you, if I can, so depending on what your perspective is, and the folks that championed these rules, their perspective would be the pros are higher density uses, less parking, less people and vehicles. If those aren't your pros as a commission and you have different pros, different things that you value and what you're trying to accomplish, that does make a determining factor. What we're trying to do tonight is lay out what we have to do and what that results in, so you all can kind of make those assessments in the chairs you sit in. I don't want to project what I think you think, but the reality is if you were to go in and say, you know what? This is the bare minimum we have to do, but we really want to encourage and promote additional housing opportunities and development opportunities for folks, then a position you could take to implement that would be to say, hey, we're going to designate all 3 of these climate-friendly areas. We're going to apply a minimum density of 20 units per acre. We're going to eliminate height standards altogether and allow the free market to reign. Like, if that's what you want to do, obviously there's a whole lot of issues that could come with that. The flip side is if it's, hey, I want to keep Keizer kind of as consistently the same as it is, then you probably want to take, well, what's the minimum amount? The other piece, the value assessment, which Chair Lawyer spoke to earlier tonight, was if the concern of the possibility of displacement or impact on a population base that may be on the lower spectrum of affordability is as a high priority to say, hey, we don't want to do anything that might have an adverse impact there, then I think that in my mind, I would probably skew my values to say, okay, Cherry is probably the less desirable and these other 2 would be the more desirable. So it's hard to give pros and cons without knowing what the commission from a policy perspective wants to see.
My point of view, it's hard for me to know what to see because there is an opportunity here too, though, right? There is this mandate. We can make it so that it bring Keizer the maximum benefit, right? We haven't looked at those. Which one would actually bring jobs or actually make the people live closer to their job? Which one provide the more number of jobs or not equal number of jobs versus the resident. I mean, there are a number of things that we can look at to say we can make a smart choice rather than just, well, let's meet the mandate and move on.
Sure. So I mean, well, and that's super helpful because what I heard you say multiple times was jobs. So jobs was the benefit in your mind. That's right?
Just one aspect.
Right. So that's an example. And I mean, what I would say to that is that these standards that are being changed in building height allowances and density allowances do not do anything specific to jobs. Yeah. Now, early on in the performance-based approach, they had a standard that was for a certain number of units and a certain number of jobs per acre. And they did modify that, I think, because people were like, well, how do you make that happen? But, so that is something that would be, it's not addressed in these rules. You know, and it's hard because zoning is generally a blanket tool that says, here's what properties can be allowed for. And then governments in general, cities, can incentivize the kind of development they want to see through things like SDC credits or enterprise zones or different tools that can be used to promote, or they have a full-blown economic development department that goes out and recruits businesses to come in and things like that. But that's not really something that we can address in these code changes. But that, yeah.
Commissioner Witters.
I have a question for you first, Shane, and then I guess some way too early thoughts or opinions. But or either of you, is the parking requirement, the lack of minimum, is that mandatory in the CFA, or is it possible to designate a minimum parking?
It's actually mandatory citywide.
that there isn't a.
Yeah, there will, so it's been a while back, but we did kind of a presentation on the parking standards that are coming into play. Off the top of my head, I don't know what our time frame is. We got an extension to implementing some of these rules. We pushed them out a little bit because of some of the other work that we're doing. But ultimately, in the CFEC rules, the grander scale, so going way back to Scott's early slide where CFAs is this little tiny piece, and then the CFEC rules are this much bigger piece. So those parking rules live in a different section of the OARs than the specific CFA rules. They do correlate and they are integrated, and eventually, I just don't remember the time frame. I think it's June of 2026, but I can't quote me on that because I don't remember for sure. At some point in time, we will not be able to mandate minimum parking standards. For the last year and a half, just FYI, we haven't been able to mandate minimum parking standards based on the OARs, which is OAR, can you help me, 12660, 0440? I don't know, there's a lot of numbers on the OARs. It drives me nuts because people at the state just quote them back to me so much. I'm like, I don't know what that is. I have to look it up every time. But they made a rule that said for basically, if you're on a high frequency transit district, which is 15-minute headways, we can't actually require any parking standards. Now, we haven't advertised that. We didn't change the code because the OAR didn't say I had to change my code right now, but I do have to directly apply that OAR. So I have had folks come in with development projects asking, what is my minimum parking space requirement? We have had partition applications and subdivision applications come in those areas, and we've had to write findings in the land use decisions that say, we cannot apply a minimum parking requirement. However, the applicant is proposing to provide parking, so we're going to hold you to our standard of of aisle widths and landscaping requirements and all those kinds of things. But it's a great question, Robin, and ultimately, yeah, we will not be able to require minimum parking mandates in the near future.
Well, the reason I was asking is I'm looking at the three different areas, you know, I'm looking at Lock Haven especially, and that obviously, like you mentioned, that's got the track land. That seems to me, regardless of what we do or decide, that's probably going to be developed, you know, fairly rapidly. And I think we're all aware that, you know, apartments seem to be the way to go, and if not apartments, maybe condos, you know, something where you can get that extra density, extra. So if we were to designate that area as one of them, it's already, in my opinion, I think it's already probably destined to follow whatever the guidelines of the CFA would be, which would mean we would need obviously one other area to go along with it. And as I think about the other two areas, the Shamawa and then the Cherry areas, I mean, to me, again, you would know better than me, but it seems to me the Shamawa area is more developed. Probably a lot of the structures there are either newer or maybe in better repair than the ones in some of the ones in Cherry. So, you know, is it going to be, do we want to designate an area that we think, yeah, it's designated, but we're probably not going to see anything happen for some time? You know, I think Cherry, it's more likely that, you know, if I own a property, do I want to, you know, either acquire it or have it and demo it and rebuild it and develop it? Or do I want to just, you know, does it make more financial sense to just continue using it as it is now? And so, you know, those are, and to me, Cherry seems to me an area that would be more likely to see some of that redevelopment than the Shamawa Center personally, again, but, you know, that's just kind of off the cuff here, you know.
Commissioner Grants?
Thank you, Chair. So back to your spreadsheet of doom. So if I remember,
Did you want to go back to that?
the final numbers are just based on pretending a blank slate, redeveloping everything to maximum density, correct? So the Lock Haven subdistrict is 300 and change below the target.
Yes.
Rough guess, what would it take to increase the maximum density to get to that target?
And it's a good question in that the unfortunate part about the prescriptive method is your actual units per net acre don't even factor into this spreadsheet. That's the weird part. So when
Your
you're
math
saying
isn't
a minimum, it's just land area. It was taking the land area. So the only way that I can, in a spreadsheet, increase the amount of units available would be, well,
Increase
would
land
be
area.
adding another floor, saying you could go even higher than 60 feet. Now, in this example in Lock Haven, all that I did in the let's change it to 5 floors was just for mixed use only. So you could address the RM zone in Lock Haven specifically. I mean, can you do that? Right, sorry, he's the land use planner. I do the spreadsheets, right? So that if that RM, because that's 42 acres of RM, that's your big development, your big undeveloped piece of property that's in Lock Haven. So if you allowed, that's built at 3 floors of development per zoning code, per zoning allowance. And if you allowed 4, it would take care of it, then Lock Haven would comply.
Yeah.
So there's another option for you.
Yeah, and I
That's
think
really
the
good.
caveat, as we
good question.
mentioned there, is some more code changes, though. Adding the RM adds a little bit more complexity. We were, as far as our initial draft of these changes, the idea was, what's the simplest change? How can we tweak this? So that was kind of our approach on the changes, focused solely to MU. Adding RM, we're gonna have to add some uses. It's gonna have to be more of a mixed-use zone, as localized again to the CFA that you decide to designate.
I have to say that it's worth probably a discussion, if that
Yeah.
were something that the commission was interested in examining, it would be a discussion worth having with DLCD.
Yeah.
Because I think that you could demonstrate, it's just worth having a discussion, right?
Yeah,
Because-
I was gonna, yes, thank you, Kim. I was gonna say, if that's something that Planning Commission wants staff to look at, I'm honestly, that's a really good point. We could definitely look at that and, kind of report back and figure out if that's an area we want to look at. I think that I could work with Kim and we could kind of crunch some numbers and figure out what would it take, since we are pretty close there. And that, I mean, I don't want to assume, Commissioner Grenz, but I'm assuming your thought process there would be, well, maybe we just designate the Lock Haven as just, that's our CFA and it deals with it, and we don't even touch the other 2. Is that what I'm getting?
That's where I was going with that. I
Okay.
mean, that clearly has the most undeveloped land
Yeah.
in Keizer, period,
Yeah.
let alone any of these 3 sub-districts. And there are a lot of barriers to developing those parcels and increasing the potential density maximums on those could push that over
Yeah.
to being developable. And the end goal is more housing, right?
Notice that, okay. Yeah,
And it minimizes the damage to the city.
good, yeah,
Yep.
got it.
I mean, it definitely would speak to the displacement risk. We know that neighborhood is a more affluent area based on the census tract. It's, whatever it was called, exclusive.
You'll just have the one developer
Advanced
to
exclusive.
apologize to.
But yeah, we can definitely look at that as an option and see what that would look like. Because yeah, I think you'd be looking at probably a little different density and a little different building heights. Maybe even go bigger than 60, just to lift the cap a little higher. And then, I mean, construction methods are going to drive what they actually build at the end of it. But it may give them more flexibility. It's great.
Well, I guess the question I would have is, do we need to keep Kim and Scott around while we sit here and scratch our heads? Because I know their time is probably valuable. I'm not trying to dismiss you, but at the same time, if I think Shane and Dina are looking for some kind of a consensus, and it might be a few minutes, so I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts? Do you want to stick around? I mean, you're welcome to.
Yeah, you're a great audience. And,
I love the way you.
we're okay. I mean, one of the things there's one of the slides up here showed kind of the timing elements of, and the city does have, I think, next year, Shane, as far as adoption, it's kind of way out and it seems like that. We are under contract, I mean, not to complicate things here, but as far as what we have as a grant, or funded, our time here, funded by the state on a limited grant, but then it expires at the end of this year. But, as far as our time, it's not being billed to the city, it's being billed to the state under grant, but we don't have that extra time frame. And so that's kind of, we would have this ability now. I'm not sure of if it's kind of going, well, let's do more work sessions of kind of like, Shane, here's the baton. And,
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think that, hearing the input we've heard tonight, and I mean, I'm not having to read too much between the lines, like you guys are pretty clear, so I appreciate it. I'm hearing the concerns about displacement. I'm hearing the concerns about maybe too much is too much. And it sounds like from Planning Commission's desire, maybe there's a little bit of a tendency of leaning towards, let's designate one area and it's one fell swoop, which is an absolute fine piece and it's helpful because one of the pieces from my perspective, Dean and I administer the code every day. So the River Cherry Overlay District sometimes drives us nuts because there's this different set of standards in this one little area, in these three little areas that's different than this other little area that's different than the rest of the city. And so it's hard to track. So, going into this process, I was hoping we could just check all the boxes and say, our code's already good and I don't have to make any changes. And I just say, hey, guess what? The centers are now called CFAs and we're good, we're done. Awesome. Well, we couldn't do that. So, in making the changes that we're making, I know we were very close. And honestly, some of those numbers were arbitrary when we created them anyway. But the reality is that I'm getting the vibe, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like Planning Commission is leaning towards saying, hey, let's stick with one CFA and not necessarily apply the same standards to all three districts and have to jump through those hoops. Is that a accurate kind of assessment of what I'm feeling? Ish? No, I got 2 head nods. 3. That's close enough for me. Okay.
Might as well make one more district different for you, Shane.
Yeah, well, no, to be fair, structurally in the code, this idea is like, honestly, it's helpful that you brought that up because that district already is different than the other two because there's a master planning requirement for any property over 4 acres in area. And the primary area we're talking about that's likely to redevelop is over the 4 acres in area. It's weird how that got written that way. I wonder who thought of that. But so there is already an extra layer of review that goes into that Lock Haven district. So in some ways, there's a good, at least in my mind, there's a good rationale to look at that. So I think I won't say the blessing, but I think with the consensus of Planning Commission, I think what makes a ton of sense is for us to get back together, crunch some additional numbers with that in mind to figure out, hey, how can we get the Lock Haven Center to meet the mandated state numbers, and what does that look like in that area for the code? We'll probably want to dive into the master plan language that already exists for the criteria to make sure those things align. And then maybe, that'd be really tight. Maybe in October, I come back to you and kind of share what that results is in that meeting. And again, Scott alluded to it, and I meant to explain this at the beginning of the night, and I failed to do it very well. When we got on board with getting funding allocated to us, essentially the state had a pot of money. They said, Shane, do you want some technical assistance in getting your code updated? And I generally don't pass up free money because Dina and I are very busy. And otherwise it was going to be Shane wading through all the OARs and hoping to get it right and not sure. And so I jumped at that opportunity, and then they said, hey, the Council of Governments already did your study. We want to work and contract with them. And I'm like, perfect, because they already know exactly what we're dealing with. That we did prior to me getting the extension granted out to 2026. And so we had been under compulsion to have this all done by the end of this year, which is why we're in the timeframe we are. Now, I want to make sure that at the very bare minimums, I get the, close your guys' ears. I get the maximum work out of Scott and Kim. So we're at least a public hearing ready, but we don't have to have everything complete from their perspective, do we, for the contract? You just have to do the deliverables for me, right? It's not,
We'll take a look at it.
okay, we got to make sure. I don't think it was tied to final adoption.
I'll just take a look.
Okay.
And we don't need to bore you with
Yeah.
the details on that.
But I do think like it might
But
be a
he's
great.
shorthand, I think is what he's saying.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it would be a good move for us to be able to go back, look at that, and then maybe at the October meeting, we have that back before you with your answers on what does it take? You know, is it a 70-foot height? Is it a 40-foot maximum density? Is it a rezone of an RM zoned property that we don't own? You know, there's things that get more sensitive at times, so. Yeah.
And I think the city attorney is going to come back with the question that was asked regarding the comprehensive plan, whether or not you have to have concurrent comp plan and zoning code amendments. That will be asked and answered probably by October, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, actually Shane's explanation for me kind of settled the issue, right? I mean, because it is part of the ROCD, which is in the comp, so I'm not as necessarily concerned about it as I thought I was at the beginning. It was just sort of a question along the way, you know? I deal with DLCD a lot, and sometimes when there's a, oh, I have an idea, well, great, your idea is fine, but point me to
Where's the connection to
authority.
rule? Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's a.
So I'm not, unless anybody else is super concerned about that, I don't think that I would ask Mr. Johnson or Mr. Lindsay to waste any additional time on that. Okay, are we good with the direction that Shane is hearing from the conversation here? Any, oh, by the way, is other thoughts, anything you else want to chime in? Because I think it's important that, you know, they get everything from us, and, you know, if something pops up between now and then, you know, reach out to them, but I think it sounds like you have your marching orders.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think it's very helpful, and like I said, I know it's always sometimes hard when we give presentations and talk a lot about rules, but this was important for us as we're getting ready to move forward into the next steps, and so I appreciate y'all looking at the stuff, coming ready to talk and ask questions.
Yeah, and Scott and Kim, thank you for being here. Thank you for indulging some of the more emotional parts of me specifically. I think this is, I totally appreciate the fact that this is not you. You're not making these decisions. You're bringing the stuff forward. This proves I don't like math, which is fine. But thank you for taking the time tonight.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Did a great
Thank you
job.
for the feedback.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, Councilor Duran, anything to add for the good of the order tonight?
No.
Not even your council representative report, sweet. Commissioner Witters, you are on for the council update. Are you good for that?
Sure, what's the date?
Is it next Monday? Yeah, next Monday. And then September 11th, so it sounds like we got some work, and by we, I mean Dina. So do we want to meet in September or give them the opportunity to work through all this stuff and then meet back up in October? We want to meet in September? No? You guys have nothing, right, for September?
I don't have anything noticed to DLCD right now for September.
Great. And then, so is it by consensus or, yeah, okay. So everybody's good to go, cancel September? And I guess the question is, do we need to ratify the chair's decision for July, since that was sort of something that happened behind the scenes? Are we good to go? Do we care?
If you want to, you can.
I don't.
I'm not sure it's absolutely.
We can't go back,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Marty hasn't shown back up with the almanac.
New sheriff in town. Chair Lawyer, new sheriff.
Mr. Lindsay's got good ideas sometimes.
Thanks.
All right, any other business? Commissioner Grants, you got anything?
No.
Sure?
Yes.
What about you, Mo? You good? All right, well, without any further ado, we will stand adjourned, what? Yes,
Sorry,
yes.
I just, one more thing, because this was a little bit of a different agenda, normally have this area. The one thing I did want to let you all know, just because you're our planning commission and it is news for the city, the first two areas, or the first two buildings in Keizer Station Area D, south of the Jug Handle Road, those permits were just issued this week. So there's two new multi-tenant buildings kind of in an L shape by where the fountain is and right across the street from Chick-fil-A, basically. We don't know tenants yet, but I don't know. I'm anticipating that we'll know tenants at some point because they'll have to tell us at some point when they get tenant improvement permits. But that's been a way, they did all that work and then things kind of stopped and everybody was wondering what was going on. Those first two buildings, the permits were issued this week. So I just want to let you guys know so you were in the know because that just happened yesterday. So
Well, good
that's
job.
it.
Cool, all right, well, we will stand adjourned at 7:55. Thank you all.
Nice job.